So the opening question for 3 minutes that I'll first pose to Sam Coleman is it a fundamental mistake to think that the world and consciousness are purely material? Sam, thank you.
Thanks, Joanna. I don't think it's a mistake at all, but I do think that we don't understand the material very well. I think that physics and science really only tell us so much. I think at the moment, in trying to explain consciousness scientifically, we're a bit like people trying to recreate a beautiful, colorful oil painting like the Mona Lisa using pencil and paper. We just don't have the right resources. So neuroscience deals in action potentials, right? Action potentials are what our senses, our nose, ears, eyes produce when they do their thing and convert light or sound into signals that are ready to be processed and turned into sensations in different parts of the brain. By the way, sensation or feeling something, that's really all I mean by consciousness, right? You've got it. The chair you're sitting on doesn't have it, presumably. A rock doesn't have it. Many animals have got it. Probably leeches don't have it. That's all I really mean by consciousness. But so folks, think about the difference between smelling coffee, tasting something else, tasting lemon, seeing a sunset, smelling a rose. There's just no way that different frequencies of electrochemical activity in the brain, which is really all that goes on, could explain those differences. It's as if I had a factory with the same machinery in it, and by plonking it down in different places, it suddenly, just by virtue of that, produced radically, inexplicably different things, like marshmallows over here, or tanks over there. The sensory, the neuronal apparatus of your different sensory areas in your brain is made of much the same machinery. There's just no way that the fact that they're in different places makes the difference between tasting peach, seeing a sunset, smelling a rose. What's the answer? We could get rid of consciousness altogether, which is what I think a neuroscience-based approach ultimately does, or it downgrades it so much that it's pretty much like getting rid of it, like ordering Pepsi and being given Coke, but like actually worse than that. Like the neuroscience-based account of consciousness is just not the real thing. Or we could do what Donald recommends and make consciousness into everything that exists. But then I just don't know how we know that we aren't alone in the universe, how we know that there's anyone else to talk to. We might just be a mind in a big empty universe. My own view is something else, right? I think philosophy can kind of supplement science to give us that extra something that matter needs to produce a conscious mind out of a brain, to give us a more colorful, if you like, enriched picture of the matter, to explain how you get consciousness in a material world. What's the extra something else? Well, different options. Maybe matter itself has a conscious aspect, or maybe it has something that is closely related to but less than consciousness. But when you put it together in the right way, it gives us consciousness. I think something like that, anyway, is going to be the way to understand consciousness in a material universe.
Thanks very much, Sam. That's great. I'll now pose the same question to Donald Hoffman. For 3 minutes, Donald, is it a fundamental mistake to think that the world and consciousness are purely material? Thank you.
So by material, I think of objects in space and time. And physicists such as David Gross and Nima Arkhani-Hamed are now telling us that space-time is doomed. By that, they mean space-time is not fundamental. And they're not just throwing up their hands and giving up. The physicists have now found structures beyond space-time, like the positive Grassmannian, the amplitude-hedron. And so this is all new. That's only been in the last 10 years that they've, for example, had the amplitude-hedron. But the idea that space and time and objects like bosons, leptons, and quarks, particles, and so forth, are fundamental is now no longer the received opinion. There's something deeper, like the amplitude-hedron, and beyond that, something called decorated permutations. And so the idea of reductionism is also doomed, according to physicists like Nima Arkhani-Hamed. The idea that as we go to smaller and smaller scales in space and time, we find more and more fundamental laws and more fundamental entities, that's also dead. So I'm not a panpsychist in the sense that I don't want to try to put consciousness in the elementary particles, because the physicists themselves tell us that space-time and the so-called elementary particles are doomed. We have to go entirely outside of space-time and trying to put consciousness inside of particles or behind particles. We have to have a much deeper framework. Now, evolution by natural selection also agrees. This is work that I've done with some of my colleagues. It also agrees that our perceptions of space and time are not an insight into the nature of reality. They're merely an interface, an artifact of our perceptual sensory systems. There's a technical question. What is the probability that evolution would shape sensory systems to see any aspect of the structure of reality as it is? And it turns out the probability is precisely zero that any sensory system has ever been shaped to see any aspect of the structure of objective reality. So evolution and the physicists agree. Space-time is doomed and reductionism is doomed. And so we have to look for a theory of consciousness outside of it. And I would agree with Sam that solipsism is not the answer either. We needed a theory of consciousness that's not solipsistic.
Thank you, Donald. That's great. Hannah, can I turn to you then in terms of what Donald's saying? And so you've written a book on consciousness. So firstly, this question of how you're defining consciousness. And I was also really interested in Donald saying he's worked on these neural correlates. And his question is, do they really give rise to consciousness? And whether you could also look at that too, that question of the particular phraseology as well.
So if we think of the idea of consciousness as our ability to form an individual, unique sense of reality that's based on our experiences, but also the genes that have been given to us from our mum and dad, which also then includes Donald's discussion on evolution. And also his idea on the importance of the microtubules as well. So basically, within each of our brains, we have this wonderful neural circuitry that connects up 86 billion nerve cells into this circuit board of around 100 trillion connections. As we learn things from our environment, as we take in information from the outside world, and we solidify them within our circuit board, what happens is that there's a new connection that forms from one nerve cell to another nerve cell. So that's something as we learn in our environment. This is what we see in the brain as we're learning things. As we consolidate that learned thing into a memory, that becomes a stable connection within the mind. And so it can become a fast route of information transfer across that very complex, intricate circuit board. And each of us have a very individual cartography, a very individual circuit board within our mind based on our experiences, and also the genes that we were given from our mum and dad. And that's what creates our very individual sense of reality, our very individual perception of the world. So there's some lovely research that's come out of Chris Frith and Jutta Frith's labs at University College London, where they've basically taken different individuals and asked them about their sense of reality about the world. And because we all take shortcuts in information processing, so each of us use about 20% of our daily energy quota in order to send those electric signals whizzing across our very individual circuit board within our mind to create our sense of reality. But we each take little shortcuts because our brain is so busy creating this up-to-date sense of reality that it has to use our previous experiences in order to make assumptions. And so what they found in the lab is that when you bring together different people and ask them about their sense of reality and ask them to freely discuss their sense of reality, then they're much more likely to get towards a more accurate representation of reality because they're balancing out any bias, any kind of errors that are coming up in their individual sense of perception of the world. So really what's important is our collective consciousness, not the individual consciousness, because we're each individually deeply flawed because of the energy metabolism within our brain.
Thank you. That's really interesting. And this sense as well of the individuals within these wider terms, that there are many, many consciousnesses. I think we'll talk about that later as well, because I know Donald has a theory that also relates to that.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below. Or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.